Rabbi Jennie Rosenn, I am so excited to see you again. It's been so long, way too long. And I'm so glad that you are here with us at Bethel in Baltimore, albeit virtually tonight, to talk about Dayenu, to talk about Tu B'Shvat, to talk about sort of how we can rise up in this moment and take better care, be better stewards of our earth. When did you hear that shofar blast, right? Like, when did you hear the call of like, oh, wow, this actually really, really matters?
I think like many people, I had my own somewhat late awakening to the climate crisis, to the direness of it, to the fact that it is coming, faster and sooner than we ever imagined, and to the fact that it's not about the environment out there. It's actually about our collective future of humanity. And that it is at its core a social and economic justice issue. My own awakening was also accompanied by a lot of conversations with friends and colleagues about the way that the American Jewish community hasn't been showing up in all of our people in power. And that we're in a moment where we need all hands on deck. This is the existential crisis of our time.
What do we need to do? Like, what are the next steps for us to be a part of mobilizing change?
That is really why Dayenu has come into being, to begin to answer that question. Dayenu is a national organization mobilizing a multi-generational Jewish movement that's confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold action. 80% of American Jews are concerned about the climate crisis. 80%, but most are not actively engaged. And I think that's for two reasons. They don't know what to do to really make a difference. It's complicated, it's scientific, it's overwhelming. And I also think there's a spiritual dimension to this. I think that it's difficult to face, to imagine that your kids might not have enough food to eat, that your city might be underwater, that we might have, it's like overwhelming. It's too much for our souls to bear. So we look away, we distract ourselves, we get busy in our lives, we watch Netflix, we do whatever we do to not, face it. So the impacts of the climate crisis are already being felt. We see them. It's not, can we keep it from happening? It's happening. The question is, can we, as I say, avert the severity of the decree, to use high-holiday language, can we keep the worst from happening? What happens in the next 10 years is I just can't emphasize enough, is critical to whether we're going to be able to shift things. I actually think that the coronavirus, in addition to the ways in which it has exposed, long-seated racial injustice, sort of systemic injustice, I think it's also given us a sense in our kishkas of what happens when things fall apart and collapse. We're kind of getting in a new way what happens when government's not prepared, when we don't listen to science, when the response is inadequate. And we have managed to change very quickly in ways that were unimaginable a year ago.
Yeah.
And so part of this is also, really understanding that the urgency of it, and that it's going to mean building a different kind of future. It's not about, it's not about returning to anything. It's about actually imagining a different kind of future, which is something the Jewish people have done time and time again.
So Rabbi Rosenn, if you had sort of a magic wand, right, if you could wave it around within our community, what would you wish for? What would you change? What would you help us open our eyes to?
A few things. One is to really take it in, to not look away, and to open our hearts and our eyes to this, and to sit with all of the grief and pain and discomfort that brings. Part of how you live with it is by acting. And so it takes us off of the sidelines and forces us to think, okay, now that I'm kind of letting myself feel this and see this, how do I act? And then to act on a systemic level. There's no way to make the math work one vegan dinner at a time. The most important thing an individual can do right now is be less of an individual and join movements that are sharp enough to make change. So I think, stepping into this powerful Jewish climate movement that we're building, which is spiritually rooted, which is rooted in our history and our values and our traditions and what we've lived through.
You know, it's so interesting as you were saying that, Dayenu, I was thinking to myself that in so many ways, like the Torah portions that we're reading, you know, this week there's this one scene that's popping up for me, which is that like Pharaoh gets up, right? He gets up because he hears the cries. And, you know, there's a part of me that's like, what was he doing sleeping? But in some ways, I feel like, you know, even within this parsha, like, you know, not hardening our hearts to the issue, and also, you know, getting up and realizing that like there are cries, you know, and there will be more cries. And there's an urgency to this, you know, that it's time for us to also, you know, get up. It's also rise up. So I'm just wondering for you, like, you know, you named your organization, which you founded. And by the way, like, wow, Dayenu, which actually means, you know, we sing this at Pesach, but, you know, had X or Y or Z, like that would have been enough, right? That would have been enough. That would have been enough. But I'm actually wondering, because I hear you saying now, like that alone is not enough. So tell me about Dayenu.
So right, it's the song of gratitude and joy that we sing, you know, in our path to liberation. But Dayenu also means we've had enough. Like exasperated, we've had enough destruction, enough inaction, enough valuing fossil fuel companies over human life, like Dayenu. And it also means we have enough. And this is really important. We have what we need to confront the climate crisis. We have the policies, we have the technology. We have what we need so that everyone can have enough. I think the other piece of Torah I keep coming back to is Lo B'Shamayim Hi. It is not in heaven, right? We're wandering in the desert, and in our journey from oppression and destruction to freedom and the promised land. And God says to us, you know, Lo B'Shamayim Hi, it is not in heaven. It is not beyond the sea. You don't have to go over the oceans to get it. It's in your hand and in your mouth, and you can do it. And that for me is the Torah of empowerment that we all need to lean into. God is our partner in this, but it is not in heaven. It is not, and it's not beyond us. It's not beyond us. The first thing to do is to go to Dayenu, Dayenu.org, and sign up to get our emails. We don't send a ton of them. We have a letter to President Biden and Congress about 7 things that can happen and need to happen right now in these kind of immediate days that will start to pave the way for a much more comprehensive response to climate. Different tactics for different people with different kind of propensities and skills, but everybody, it's like the Mishkan. Everybody needs to bring their gifts. Everybody has a different set of gifts, and we all need to be bringing them, because what's at stake, you know, what's at stake, we talk about Bal Tashchit and Shomrei Adaman, sort of classic environmental values, all of which are true. But this is also about like, B'chartai b'chaim, are we choosing life? And at its core, it's about whether we'll continue Lador Lador, which I can't even, it's like hard to even take in. But that's what's at stake. Are we going to continue generation to generation? And what will that world look like?
Please God, you know, we will together be agents for change. So thank you for being with us.
Amen.
Chag Sameach. It should be a good Tu B'Shvat, and we should do something on this Tu B'Shvat that will make us feel proud of our stewardship of the earth and hopeful for the future. Chag Sameach.